First, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to converse with you, which I think is something quite rare historically and theologically. A meeting between religious figures in the two religions, the two great religions, in a feeling, an ambience of friendship and amity rather than enmity, which is really nice. I hope that I will not evoke any enmity within you. And if I should tread on any theological toes, as I am probably bound to do, since our theologies somewhat differ, then I apologize in advance, since no slight is intended. Absolutely no slight. I have thought a lot in preparation for this lecture, what the emphasis should be, and ultimately I think that the most important issue under discussion here is that of Messianism. Messianism in the grander sense of some kind of what the Greeks would call Deus ex machina, a God that descends down to earth and solves matters. And I believe that this idea, this essential idea of salvation attained through extra-worldly means lies at the core of all Messianic beliefs, be it a God that saves or some other cosmic event that transforms reality from within. And in varying degrees, humans are called to impact that messianic event, the salvatory event, in various sects, religions, and faiths. So every religion has its own take on the actual acts that can impact, or maybe no act can impact. As we know, Luther with sola fides. I don't know enough Catholic theology. I think that the Counter-Reformation aligned itself with Luther, but I may be wrong. And again, no slight is intended, it is only my ignorance. So I will speak of things that I know of rather than those that I know not of. Ultimately, we see that actions may or may not be taken to bring about the Messianic era, the Messianic overturning of reality and the ushering in of a new age, a salvatory age. So this lies, I think, at the very focus of both perhaps the argument that is between Judaism and Christianity, and perhaps there is less of an argument today in some Jewish sects, although there may be enmity because when two beliefs are struggling over the same niche, there's bound to be conflict. According to whose vision of salvation will salvation occur? And I'm sure you know more of this than I do. In any case, I am going to focus now within this context of the Messianic and what human beings can do to usher in the Messianic on the thought of Rabbi Kook, who is a theologist, a Jewish theologist of the highest degree. He was the first chief rabbi of Israel. He was a philosopher and a theologian and a Kabbalist of the highest degree. He was well versed in all the channels and path of Jewish mysticism, as well as all the factual edicts of halacha. It was said that he went through the Talmud every 30 days. He repeated his knowledge of the Talmud so that he would not forget it, and it remained knowledge that he knew by heart. Rabbi Kook was at the very center of events which gave rise to the great turn in Jewish Messianic expectations surrounding the Balfour Declaration, where the Jews reassumed their expectations of ushering in the Messianic age through more tangible acts within reality. So Judaism has always been a religion in which the individual is called through various actions and thoughts to save reality from itself. There is much speaking of the saint who, unbeknown to any, does good deeds, thinks proper thoughts, and is linked through Kabbalah, through the secret mysticism, to the very well springs of reality, which he influences at the highest level, thereby amending, correcting, or even expiating the sins of the generation, something that may sound quite Christian to you, for it is a saying in the Gemara that the death of the saints atones for our sins. Sounds familiar? I suppose so. So this was something that is well entrenched in Jewish traditions, but I think this here we can say is an influence of the rise of modernity, of the rise of science. And let me digress here and talk a little bit about the belief of science, the belief of materiality, which has impacted so deeply all religions on earth, whatever they are, and all traditions. And a very interesting fact comes to light from a work by Shapin. Stephen Shapin wrote about the scientific revolution and about and this is really the best place to talk about this. I'm so happy to be able to speak of this anecdote here in this particular forum. So he was going over the argument, the classic argument between Galileo Galilei and the Pope, which is, this is the classic paragon of how science overcomes dogma, because Galilei said under his mustache, it shall move, the earth doth move rather than the sun, and so on and so forth. And he was then exiled, a very convenient exile, in which he sat 30 years and wrote his most devastating works that undermined dogma, theology, and so on. But the important thing is that Shapin raises is that Copernicus brought his theory of the heliocentric worldview 100 years previously. A lot of people knew about it. Copernicus himself was a monk. So he was inside the Christian world and there was no problem with it. So why did it become suddenly problematic with Galileo? And Shapin points out a very, I think this is a crucial thing to realize here, and it was not for nothing that the Pope exiled Galileo. And it was because Galileo said that this is not mere theory, this is not mere conjecture, but the actual way that reality works. He insisted that it is not just interesting for calculations as a kind of theoretical exercise to place the sun at the center and calculate all the motions as if the earth was moving around the sun. But he claimed that reality corresponded to that idea, that in fact he was looking at the reality through his telescopes and making his measurements, and that is how the actual real behaved. That this was a not conjecture, but truth. This was the problem. Suddenly, this turned to the real as the very essence of the place where we can learn truth, and instead of scripture, of course. And I don't have to tell you that subsequently, particularly in the Protestant world, there were two books opening. Of course, they had to do away with the Pope, because the Pope did say that this was dogma. You can't go against dogma. You can't decide suddenly to look at reality and say that this is the reality. And this arose in Protestant countries, actually, where they began looking at the two books of nature, the book of scripture and the book of nature. And I won't go into that in depth, although there's a lot to say about the way that Protestant theology interacts with the rise of science. And Weber had something to say about it, Max Weber, but that is not relevant to our issue here. What is relevant here, and what I want to take from this anecdote, is the turn to the real. This idea that events in reality, that looking at reality, that looking at empirical facts could in fact dictate our idea of truth. This is not a done thing. Most religious people, if I speak for Judaism, then they say, we don't really care about reality. We care about what it says in the Torah. If the Torah says it's like this, it's like this. And let reality do what it wants. But we believe otherwise. If the rabbi says that it is night now and we see that the sun is shining, then we must be in error. And I'm sure that you have similar theologies within Catholicism, some kind of papal infallibility. And we have this a lot now in Judaism, the rabbinical infallibility, the idea that the great rabbis have a kind of Holy Spirit hovering about them, and they can do no wrong, they can know no wrong. So this is the classic approach to reality. But now, insidiously, through the rise of secularism, through the rise of science, and this new vision, so aptly encapsulated in this anecdote of the altercation between Galileo and the Pope, this new vision of reality, in fact, now impacts theology as well. And suddenly we are not looking only at, and now I'm going back to Judaism, we are not going back only to the individual and all kinds of actions that he may do to speed the coming of the Messiah, the coming of the ultimate redemption, or to save the generation from the troubles and woes that befell it, but also larger historical movements, larger events can be perceived as heralding or announcing the coming of the Messianic age. And this has become much more entrenched because of the way that science now overtakes the worldviews. Now, this is like an overlay over a Jewish tendency, a Jewish messianic tendency in any case, that we see that in Jewish history, every 200 years or so, there is a messianic uprising. And I believe Christianity itself was one of those uprisings, which eventually was led off to a new start for billions of people, millions and millions of people, which began as an intra-messianic vision within Judaism. And this has happened over generations, that messianic movements arise within Judaism, sometimes encompassing the entire Jewish nation, and always ending, or as far as Jews are concerned, they end in failure. So this is a tendency to look at reality, to seek the inklings of redemption, to look at reality and find portents for the coming salvation. Now, add to this the rise of modernity with its strong stress on looking at the real. And we find Rabbi Kook, who is the focus of our conversation here, at the very, very center of events that would ultimately lead to the Balfour Declaration, in which the Jews were given a home in Palestine. Now, you have to understand the importance of Palestine for Jewish theology. Ultimately, according to the core creed, all of the commandments that the Jews have been commanded are only commanded for carrying out, for adhering to in Palestine, in the land of Israel. So actually, it is quoted, "We were taken out of Egypt so we could go into the land of Israel and worship the Lord there through obedience to his commandments as inscribed in the Torah and in the words of the sages." And this was the reason. We were not supposed to keep the commandments outside of the land of Israel. And there is some very strong language in the Maimonides, which says the Jews who keep the commandments, observe the commandments outside of the land of Israel, are idolaters in purity, because it is like idolatry if you do things outside the land of Israel. So the land of Israel, the sovereignty of the Jewish people in Israel, is a major theological issue which lay dormant all those years, that the Jews were spread all over the world in exile, as it were, and this reached, and all the time they were waiting, when will we be able to go back to our land so we can realize the actual commandment of the Lord, the actual theological commandment which says that the Jewish people should worship God in the land of Israel. This was a very serious thing. There are many, many commandments also that cannot be carried out unless all of the Jewish people are sitting, or the majority of them are resident in the land of Israel. And there's a big argument today, is there a majority already or not? Because there's so many Jews still in the diaspora all over the world. And that's another issue, what's happening with them, what kind of theology they have now that the state of Israel has come to be. But we will not focus on that today. We are focusing on what is the issue of the sovereignty as part of the theology. Now, Rabbi Kook was deeply knowledgeable in the ways of Kabbalah, in the Jewish mysticism, and this was always wed to the actual halakha. There cannot be a conflict between halakha. It's called the nigle, the halakha that is seen, the codex of the laws, and the secret knowledge of Kabbalah. In fact, we find some conflicts, and there's always explanations why the conflicts arise and how they should be settled by the individual when he goes about trying to discern what to do. But the thing is that for Rabbi Kook, the events at the end of World War II, and especially the Balfour Declaration, was a messianic twist, was a messianic shift that changed the whole theological perspective. And I have to tell you now that this has not been adopted by all observant Jews. Rather, for example, Chabad, who are worldwide, they disagree, or Satmar, they disagree. What do they say? They say, no, our messianic expectations will not be fulfilled by real events in reality, by the real actions of people doing things, sovereign things, political things, material things. No, it will come from heaven. The third temple will come in a blazing fire from heaven. This does not mean that they strip Judaism from its practical aspect, because, as I said, Judaism is always a religion in which the actions of the person can usher that messianic era by some trigger, by doing that action which is missing in order to fulfill the coming of the Messiah. So the Deus Ex Machina is there, the idea of messianic salvation is there, but the individual is called to keep the commandments, to adhere to the commandments as closely as possible on an individual basis, and thereby mystically he may be able, by being a saint, he may be able to usher in the age of the Messiah, and it is only then that the people of Israel will return to the land, and only then will they carry out their ultimate goal, their ultimate purpose of worshipping the Lord on the land. Now, what happened with Rabbi Kook was he said, look, this is a new twist in reality, and we are now being called upon not just to keep the commandments, but to seize the land of Israel, and this itself is a commandment. And he brought all kinds of things, all kinds of edicts that were already embedded in it, in the Codex of Judaism, which state very clearly that one must not leave the land of Israel in the hands of other religions, of other peoples, but only it should be in the Jews. Only the Jews should have sovereignty. And while other Jewish streams continued to wait for the Messiah who will bring about this sovereignty, Rabbi Kook turned to reality and stated that the actual political happenings, the actual war between the powers, they will bring about the salvation. So he was greatly supportive of all the Jews that were struggling to build a Jewish home in Palestine, even though they were quite distant from observance. They were completely secular and even sometimes heretical, truly heretical. Some of the letters that Rabbi Kook had, for example, the correspondence he had with Brenner, who was a great heretic, are really an amazing thing to read. But because Rabbi Kook saw the messianical import of these actions by Jews who were no longer observant, he supported them and fostered them and encouraged them in all their efforts, saying that they were God's tool, that they were God's work in reality through these people who, unbeknown to them, are carrying out divine plan. So this is another issue, the issue of unbeknown to them, that the divine plan is always carried out despite your intentions, or with your intentions. God brings about what he wants to say, what he wants to do. As Joseph spoke unto his brothers and told them, you intended evil, but God only wanted the good. So he turned things around, that everything you did only benefited the good. And that kind of vision, the vision that ultimately it is God who manages reality, now became not just a vision of the after days. One day the Messiah will come if we but adhere to the commandments, but now became something immediate, something tangible. These people who are going to settle in that inhospitable land and re-establish the Jewish presence there, they are the tools in the hand of God. And God is setting up the state of Israel. And God is bringing back Israel to its rightful place. And of course, I don't have to tell you the implications this has for Catholic theology, for Protestant theology, for Christian theology in general, because Christian theology is at odds with the nationhood of the Jewish nation. I won't go into that. And again, I hope I don't tread on any toes here, but I'm just reporting the way things are. And for this reason, Rabbi Kook and his followers are among the only theologians who actually deal with Christianity and with Catholicism. And one of the students, subsequent disciples of the son of Rabbi Kook, Rabbi Leon Ashkenazi, for example, directly interacts with the ideas of the Catholicism. Livni wrote a whole book about Catholicism and the redemption of Israel and so on. Obviously, this is a theological impasse, or a theological descent of the highest dimensions here, and it all boils down to what kind of salvation we can expect and what are our messianic expectations. Okay, I've spoken quite a bit, and again, I hope I have not offended any sensibilities. I am always open to discussion and argument. You are all invited to commence dialogue with me. I am very open to it. I am always interested in theology, in how people view reality and the reality behind the reality. But I will just say I will devote a few more minutes to the idea of what happened after Rabbi Kook. Rabbi Kook passed away just as the first glimmerings of the final solution came into being in 1939, just as the Second World War began. Rabbi Kook passed away, and his students, his inheritors, first his own son, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, and then subsequently at the present there is Rabbi Tau, who represents the direct lineage of Jewish rabbis who were ordained by, that the ordainment in Judaism goes from rabbi to rabbi. Each rabbi ordains his pupil as having studied with him and as having learned his Torah, and who is now fit to teach and to serve as a rabbi. This has changed. I don't want to go into it because there's the chief rabbinate now, and it's brought some deep alterations in this basic path. But still, as far as the believers, the Jewish observant believers, the religious Jews are concerned, it is the charismatic handing of the flame of the torch from one generation to another that is the crux of rabbinical authority. So I will just state a few words about what happened after the demise of Rabbi Kook. As you well know, after that there was the Shoah, and while 98% of the Jewish people were opposed to having a nationhood in Israel before the Shoah, after the Shoah, 98% of them were pro-Israel, where before there was great great objection to Zionism, both practical objection because it raised the idea that Jews may be unfaithful to their own home countries, and Jews everywhere saw themselves as very faithful to France, to Germany, to England, and so forth. And we know that they served in the armies of these countries, and it's an old there's an old caricature that shows a French Jew and a German Jew attacking each other over the trenches in the First World War, and each one of them calls out the famous cry of the Jew in peril, the Shema Israel, Hero Israel. And they are just rushing at each other, both loyal to different foreign armies, but both also deeply Jewish. So many of these Jews rejected Zionism as a way, as something that would stigmatize them as unfaithful to their own countries. And on a theological level, as I said, many Jews many religious Jews rejected Rabbi Kook's stance, because they did not believe that secular Jews had anything of the divine about them, even inadvertently and even unknowingly. They were just called evil men, the people who do not keep the commandments, they are hated by God, and so on. And on a more deeper theological level, Messianic level, we are not supposed to bring about the end of days with our own hands, but we must wait patiently until God redeems us, God comes down to save us. And there are the something that's called the three oaths that God made the people of Israel swear that they should not come to Israel before the time of redemption, and so on. I won't go into it at the moment, but anyway, while Rabbi Kook claimed that the Balfour Declaration had removed these barriers and God was now telling the Jewish people to come back to Israel, other Jews remained unconvinced, and to this day, many religious Jews do not view the state of Israel as a theological cataclysm in the way that the Rabbi Kook and his subsequent adherents view it. And now I will continue what I wanted to say about his successors. So the successor, his son, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, placed increasing emphasis on the core idea that only by holding all of the parts of the Holy Land, only by having Jewish sovereignty over all parts of Israel, may the Messiah be the Messianic age, the Messianic age be ushered, because until then, we are still in exile and we are still idolaters in purity. So only when all the people of Israel will hold all of the land of Israel in its entirety, only then will redemption be possible. So this was a very deep thrust for settlements all over Judea and Samaria, all over the ancient parts of Israel, a very strong political stance that stated that no inch of the Holy Land should be given over to other nations, because that would be undermining the very purpose of the existence of the Jewish people, which, as we said before, the purpose is to keep the commandments in the land of Israel. Subsequent events in the secular state of Israel, I have to tell you that it was a secular state. It is a secular state, and the people who founded it had mostly no idea of what Rabbi Kook and other religious people were thinking. If they had any idea, it was only if it served or disserved their political ends. Of course, it was very convenient for the secular sovereign rulers of Israel that there is a religious sect within them that is completely pro-Israeli government, strong military hold on the land and so on. But in any case, since it was a secular regime which did not find any messianic content in the actual political events that overtook Israel over the years, they eventually gave away pieces of land. First, it was Yamit, that was the first shock, which was a small piece of land close to Gaza. And ultimately, it was the Gush Katif, the whole area near Gaza, that was uprooted by Sharon subsequently, and gave a shock that still reverberates in the inheritors of Rabbi Kook. Because if in the 6 Days War and the slow building of a Jewish settlement in Israel, one could see that the footprints of the Messiah are already imprinted in the rocks, and soon, oh soon, the people of Israel will occupy the entire land of Israel. Now there was a setback in this divine plan, for in the reality of the world, Israel withdrew from areas that were considered to be sacrosanct and belonging to the Jewish nation. This shock, in fact, led to an earthquake within the theological offspring of Rabbi Kook, and in particular, Rabbi Tau, who is the current leader of the stream that sees itself as the successor of Rabbi Kook. And what happened there was that he completely retreated from the original view and began to supply ad hoc explanations for the events, which in fact no longer viewed the secular, he's active at the moment, at this very moment we speak, he is very theologically active, no longer view secular Jews as vehicles of redemption, but rather now turn around and view them more in line with the traditional view of non-observant Jews as vehicles of impurity, vehicles of evil, vehicles of things. They are Balaamites. How do you say Balaam, the famous wizard who went to curse Israel and ultimately gave an advice that one should bring them down through rampant sexuality, through defilement and impurity. So now the entire vision of secular Judaism as the carrier, the unwitting carrier of God's will, has been erased, and instead they are the unwitting puppets of a great evil that is twisting their minds against the divine plan. I do not have to tell you, I leave this to Karma ben Yochanan, how much the idea of some external influence operating on Israeli soil has become entrenched in Jewish theology and Jewish halacha, and has led to quite some bitter and stringent stances as regards Christianity and other religions. But this does not arise from the ideas of Rabbi Kook, although the school that are the disciples of Rabbi Kook are certainly among the most vociferous in their objection to any cooperation between Jews and Christians, in that they perceive Christianity as one of the influencers who are impacting the souls, the unwitting souls of the secular Jew, who has now turned against the great theological vision of Rabbi Kook. So, wrapping up, I would say that as theologians, we have our work cut out for us, both when we think about interfaith relations. I think much more has been left unsaid and unstated through probably fear that we would undermine our own theological positions if we were to listen too keenly to the theological positions of the other, but also I think intra-faith, each religion has much to contend with. Divisions of modernity are rampant everywhere. Secularism is everywhere. A rising vision, and I believe that also new theologies, new ideas about how one should address God and live with God are encroaching all the time on the traditional positions. And the question in my mind is how a new synthesis can be brought about that will preserve the best of traditions and allow people to live with dignity in traditional societies, while at the same time not rejecting the great truth, the great blessings, the great tidings of modernity, which, as far as I'm concerned, hinge around the equality of the genders, the openness towards the realization of each human potential, the trust in each human being, our belief in the goodness of all human beings, and in the basic right of all human beings to freedom, to equality, and to the realization of their potential, or as the Americans say, the pursuit of happiness. So ending on this optimistic note, I thank you again for this opportunity. God bless.